Welcome again to the first AI and Ethics Talks hosted by City.AI and IEEE Standard Association. So we are so proud as City.AI to partner with a global community like IEEE Standard Association. And we are now bringing you some series of talks to talk more about focusing on more implementing responsible and sustainable AI in the cities and organization. And we're really happy to try to connect both communities together. So make sure to network in the social lounge. You're just there. And we will make sure to take a 1 hour break. Once John and Andre, our speakers, are done, we'll take a 5-minute break, and you could connect with each other, join the social lounge, and introduce yourself a little bit for 5 minutes. Then after 5 minutes, Karen and Michaela will go and live, and we will join again the live session. Please feel free, if you need any support, to ask in the chat. Our team will help you if you don't know how to maybe ask the questions, or if you're not sure if you have any problem while connecting, please let us know. And make sure that in the chat you maybe discuss what's happening, you ask some questions, and you have in the right side of your toolbar a question tab where you can ask questions specific to the speaker. So while the speaker is talking, if you have any question that you want to ask him, we'll have a discussion, a 5-minute discussion after every presentation. So please make sure you ask some questions. As you know, we have people from all around the world. We are really happy that everyone now is here from different countries. And I want to really thank our speakers, because without them, we couldn't make it. They are really, I'm really excited to check what they will talk about. And if you don't know me, I'm Larissa, the community lead of City.AI, and I'm also running locally Beirut AI. I also co-founded Zaka, a community-driven AI company focusing on AI education in the MENA region. So now I'll leave the floor for John. John will be our first speaker. He's also one of the organizers, and he also pushed a lot for this partnership. So thank you a lot, John. And I also want to thank all the IEEE team for making this happen. If you don't know John, he's the executive director of the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. He also wrote 2 books, and I'll make sure to read them by the end of this year, about artificial intelligence. It's about embracing our humanity to maximize machines, and hacking happiness, why your personal data counts on how tracking it can change the world. I make sure to add them to the chat, so if you want to read them, you can do it. So John, you can take the floor, and thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure, Larissa, and thank you so much. And Alpesh Shah and Moira Patterson, my other colleagues from IEEE Standards Association, just want to say real honor to be working with City.AI. And the chat, all the people who've already joined from around the world. It's really, really exciting to see all the global participation from Singapore and Japan, Beirut. So again, thanks, Larissa, to you and the City.AI team. Really thrilled to be here. As you said, you were already kind enough to introduce me, so thank you so much. And my full bio is on the Eventbrite site, and you can also see, and we'll put that link back in the chat again, just so you can see the full bios of all of our amazing speakers. In just a second, I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. And then I will introduce my amazing friend and colleague, Andre Uhl. We'll take a few minutes, as Larissa pointed out, so you can network with each other before hearing then from Michaela and then Karen. And also during that networking session for that 5 minutes or so while we're waiting or allowing Michaela and Karen to prepare for their talks, also please feel free to start posting questions, because after Karen finishes her talk, then the 4 of us, Karen, Michaela, Andre, and I will do a conversation at the end where I'll ask some questions for the 3 of them rather, but also really want to get to your questions quickly as well. So anyway, thanks so much for the rundown, or hearing the rundown of what we're going to do. And now I'm going to share my screen and hopefully can quickly and easily get to my presentation. And Larissa, can you just confirm for me, spoken wise, that you can see my deck? Can everyone see my deck?
Yes, sure.
Perfect.
Thank you, John, for everything.
Well, my pleasure. Okay, I'll go for about 20 minutes. And as you can see here, ethically aligned design for business. My focus here, knowing that the larger focus of today's talk is about cities and AI. I'm really excited to have all the experts that we have on the call today and implementing the different principles and aspects of what I'm talking about here. Really, how can you get, in one sense, more pragmatic to implement principles for responsible or values-driven AI than in city? So really exciting to have this whole perspective. But my goal in going first was to kind of get, at least from a standpoint of how IEEE, the work that I am honored to help lead, thinks about things, is moving what we call from principles to practice. So it can sometimes feel esoteric to talk about, say, ethics or values. And so the goal of this first upfront from me is to sort of give a level set of, again, at least at IEEE, how we view this idea. I should also say that these are my thoughts. I represent IEEE's ethics work, but not everything I'm saying is necessarily, a board level IEEE vision or what have you. Anyway, so first let me talk about this. What is responsible? The word responsible.
John, sorry to interrupt. So
yeah.
Are you sharing your screen? Because it's not shown. Can you try it again, please?
I will, sure.
Yeah, please.
Okay, let's see, share.
So don't forget, guys, I tried to ask a question in the question tab. Make sure you check it. Ask a question here. Check any question you have, even if the speakers didn't start yet. And in the chat, you can comment. Also, we have the reaction tab. You can say good, for example. We can see the screen. We can clap. We can send some love. So try to interact a little bit. And thank you. So we can see your screen now, John. You can go ahead.
Okay, thanks so much. So what does the term responsible mean in terms of artificial intelligence systems? And I should say at IEEE Standards Association, we prefer the term artificial intelligence systems, or AIS. It's also a term that the OECD uses. And mainly the logic is to be comprehensive. So rather than talk about only autonomous or intelligent systems, and to not worry too much about framing specifically what type of AI, meaning is it reinforcement learning, data science. Anyway, the point is it's a much broader kind of comprehensive aspect of all the different systems involved with AI. So you can read while I'm talking here. I won't read all the stuff on the bottom, but how we started our work back in 2015 was to actually gather, at the time, it started off with 12 people and it grew to about 700 over the course of 3 years, is we created this document called Ethically Aligned Design, which we'll post the link for. It's free, it's Creative Commons. And really to say, how would anyone know all of the different principles or issues regarding artificial intelligence and ethics? And so in 2016, a group that had been working for about a year of about 100 people released the first draft of this book, we'll call it Ethically Aligned Design, and asked for feedback. And what was really exciting is we got about 500 pages of feedback for both versions that we launched. And what I found very exciting and reflects really what we're doing here today is the global perspective. Right away, we got a lot of feedback, especially from Japan, China, and South Korea, saying this is great work, but it really feels kind of Western in nature. Can we also join in? And the answer was yes, and we were thrilled. So the version that came out in 2019, the picture you can see here is called the first edition, features what we call this conceptual framework. And I want to start here in terms of how is this framing responsible design? Well, a big part of that for us, and we believe for everyone, is responsible design has to be what's called participatory in nature. You have to be asking about end user values, their principles, and whether the end users are residents in a city, maybe they are residents in a different country if you're working on global principles or regional principles. You can't move forward talking about ethics and make assumptions about people's values or how they live. And also ethics is a understandably sometimes big term. It can sound like it's always about morals. Sometimes with business audiences, understandably, they may frame that in law or compliance. These are all incredibly important things. But for us, responsible design really starts with design at the outset of anything you do. a core part of the logic here, which can be challenging, but also is not just about avoiding risk, it's about having more opportunity for innovation, is to utilize methodologies of what's called values-driven design or responsible innovation to ask questions about end users and the context of how your artificial intelligence systems, products, services, or systems are going to be used in the context of where they're going to be released. This is actually when you ask those questions using the stakeholders in a participatory way. Then again, really what happens, almost sometimes the priority or the really exciting part that happens first is innovation, where innovation is defined as insights from the people who are either going to purchase what you're selling or who are going to be utilizing as a citizen what you're creating. So avoiding risk is obviously key, right? No one wants to harm. There's unintended things that happen, and that never is something we can avoid. That's absolute due diligence. But our point here, starting off with responsible innovation, is to also make it clear, both to business and policymakers, as it's really clear to the people here on the phone and the innovators, I'll call them, is that responsible AI is not about hindering innovation in one sense. It's sort of reframing innovation in the algorithmic age. Because data is so much focused on and coming from people, it's not something where when you can sort of rush and avoid that step because of any reasons. Rushing means that automatically it's sort of bad design, or not just sort of bad design, it is bad design because you're not including the people who you're most trying to reach. So next, how can you operationalize responsible artificial intelligence systems? And I want to give you a little preview here, and I'll talk a little bit more. But what you're looking at now is what we call our AI Fx Readiness Framework. It's from another report at IEEE called A Call to Action for Businesses Using AI. It's, again, free, Creative Commons. And we were honored to have in that committee people from Intel and Google, Kathy Baxter from Salesforce, people from IBM, to the people who are chairs who were both from IBM. And the group that created this, most of them are senior product managers in these really large, huge organizations. And what's so exciting to me, because I had the privilege of being on the committee, is that they were telling us that this framework is something that they find is absolutely critical in their own organizations for their colleagues. And the logic of the framework hopefully is pretty self-explanatory. On the left-hand side, you just see different types of issues that everyone worries about in any organization. And then on the right is a self-classifying tool for an organization in those four, and there's more areas in the full document, those 4 issue areas. Now, what that means is lagging is not a negative term. It just means maybe you haven't started doing leadership buy-in. Maybe leadership buy-in is something that you feel your organization, you really want to go to the C-suite or state board members and talk about responsible AI. Okay, but maybe with organizational impact, you've done some really advanced work. The whole point here is that a first step is sort of saying to yourself and your organization, where are we in this framework? Because then what it means is moving from left to right, as it were. It becomes a pragmatic, again, design-oriented practice, where in this case, it's also organizational design. It's not just design of the actual AI-oriented tools that you're creating. And it calms people down. That's what we've been finding, and that's what the experts who created this told us, is that really this first step of just sort of saying, everybody, let's take a deep breath. AI systems are here to stay, right? It's like the internet. Like no one can say anymore, like, let's skip machine learning or data science. So when you take that deep breath and the first step is sort of saying, here's where we are on our readiness framework, then it lets you know who are the stakeholders in the organization, outside of the organization, and what are the different methodologies that we can implement. Then it just becomes tasks to do and tasks that will lead to innovation and avoidance of risk, et cetera. So anyway, hopefully that's encouraging is the goal. I just want to point out that IEEE, the work that Ethically Aligned Design led to, is a series of standards. And the one thing I love about working with IEEE, sorry if this is pitchy, but this is free, I should point out, any standards working group that you'll see me list on the next 2 slides, they're open for anyone to join. And just like Ethically Aligned Design, how we created it, everything that we do is by consensus. And consensus doesn't mean that everyone has to agree 100%. What it means is that everyone has a voice. Everyone is heard and has a vote when they join the standards working groups, and there's policies to follow and all that. But the point there is that with your voice and vote, you get to say whatever you want. And if you have concerns about how things are developing, you have ideas about things, fantastic. The invitation is here. That's a very clear message I want to give as part of this work is we need you. IEEE is built on volunteers and the brilliance that they bring. So these 13 standards working groups, or I should say 12, because 7010 is now available as a standard. We call these impact standards because they formally address socio-technical aspects of artificial intelligence systems. We also have what we call these technical standards, where of course socio-technical issues still come up, but a lot of times in these standards working groups, the focus is more about really understanding a specific, very highly technical aspect of one of the components of artificial intelligence systems. But again, these are all open. Love to have you join, and feel free to email me about how to get involved. Okay, I'm going to go for about, I think, 5 or 6 more minutes because I know I had the whole half an hour or so. Anyway, so now I'm calling this slide the foundation because what we're seeing in the larger global realm of artificial intelligence systems design and governance is a few key regions first. And by the way, Singapore has done amazing work, certainly in the financial realm. China just announced some really exciting children's data work that they're doing. So I'm only showing the EU principles here. That's one region because it's also one of the first regions that really created what they call their framework for trustworthy AI. Here, I'm not trying to show the high-level experts group work from the EU to say it's the only framework. I'm just saying, how do we move from principles to practice? Because I used to be in the corporate world. I was an EVP of social media at a top 10 PR firm. And I get in the corporate world, the logic a lot of times is, okay, how do we get moving on this? How do we incorporate this into our work? So the top conceptual framework from principles to practice, that's the logic is how do you take the book, the 300-page version of ethically aligned design, which really is about the guts, as it were, of creating and designing, right? We wrote it to be sort of a textbook, not just outlining, say, a list of principles, as important as that is, but to then say, for instance, on the chapter that we have on effective computing, which is in the final version of ethically aligned design, there are about 10 or 12 issues about things like, how do you avoid manipulation? How do you avoid nudging? Well, those are the same questions that are coming up in the larger frameworks, like the high-level experts group, with regards to things like how do we have meaningful disclosure, which can factor into explainability. So the point is that ethically aligned design for us is a really comprehensive sort of textbook or deep reservoir of evergreen, really in-depth advice and counsel for anyone creating guidelines. And we were honored, by the way, that the OECD used the second version of ethically aligned design to create their principles. Future of Life Institute used our principles to help develop theirs. And the high-level experts group, 3 people from our executive committee that I had the honor of sitting on are actually part of the EU high-level experts group as well. Francesca Rossi, Virginia Dignam, and Raja Shatila. But here the basic logic is, how do we move from the sort of guts, the information of how to create the design, and then think about frameworks like, and as one example, the high-level experts group. And then think about now, and I'm going to sit with this slide again as I wrap up my talk, how do you go from looking at one of these frameworks like this one back to where you are as an organization? Now, I'm going to use the word organization broadly. I don't just mean a corporate setting, policy setting. I've had the honor to meet with Karen a lot of times. So the City of New York is doing incredible work, and I'm going to use the term organization for them there. Obviously, the makeup of the organization is critical. A city-based or governance-based institution, policy-based versus, say, corporate, where focus may be on selling. Very different, outputs and deliverables, as it were. But the framework that we're looking at here, and something like the EU high-level experts group, the larger framing of the EU high-level experts group, the logic is then to kind of plug into this readiness framework and say, well, for instance, who are the people that we may not have on staff yet that will really help us interpret areas of those frameworks where on staff, the only reason that we're, quote, lagging is because maybe there's not someone on staff who may know something about, say, human rights law. Kathy Baxter and Salesforce have done amazing work on hiring issues, and Kathy and her work are featured in the same paper, where one thing that's also important to understand is In the same way, when you think about the word the internet, right? Right now, if I said, hey, I want an internet expert, depending on the context of that question, it wouldn't really make sense because the internet is so broad. Likewise, what we are counseling to people based on this work with the people I mentioned in our committee and just in general is to recognize, and we have an experts network that we're creating for IEEE as well, it's in development, that it's critical to understand that in the same way the internet or something like marketing is transversal in an organization. And marketing is not just about selling, right? It's about communicating. Where those needs are so broad, AI ethics or artificial intelligence systems and ethics is not going to be about just one person who says, I'm Susan, the AI ethics person, who answers all questions for every context. What Kathy was saying in our report, Kathy from Salesforce and the other people like from Microsoft and so we're also saying is the truth for them, is that what happens, and Annie Jean-Baptiste from Google mentioned this as well, is that there'll be sort of evangelists within an organization who first recognize the need and the efficacy for responsible AI. And they kind of raise their hand and say, hey, there are practices and methodologies that we can utilize, like the ones from IEEE or the ones from the high-level experts group, that really let us ask questions in a different way that can help us examine these critical issues of data governance and also understanding end user values in a way that will actually sort of change how the entire organization functions. And again, back to what I said to start this talk, what we've found in our interviews and work with corporate organizations and others, and the basic idea and ideals of responsible AI, is a lot of what we are finding is exciting for people, is that having these questions at the outset or the very beginning of design, the real challenge is that there's sort of this training, as it were, or deep pressure, which is understandable, sometimes to move products to market or to have certain answers to things quickly. But what we're counseling in our work, the work that I help drive with IEEE Standards Association, is never to ignore those things that are already pressures, because they just are, right? But it's to start framing those pressures as questions of how these questions have actually new solutions. If part of what we did is at the outset of really using participatory design measures to include the people in the process of asking about how our tools and artificial intelligence systems are going to affect them. When you ask those questions up front, besides avoiding risk, where say you might produce a product quickly and not realize, without intention of course, but not realize that what you're creating is going to cause harm. When I say that there's innovation opportunities, that's true. When you ask, say, moms about how a certain chip or chatbot is going to be used, say, for a banking or financial institution, if whatever the organization is creating that chatbot has not reached out to those moms specifically about their values, how would they use these devices? Where do they use these devices? Pretty similar questions to what we did in PR and marketing, asking about demographic research. Their answers, when they inform design at the outset of design, means you include the insights that are instantiated from their insights, rather, into the product design. This means that it becomes a competitive advantage in a couple ways. One is, and this moms would then know, I was listened to, that product was created with me in mind, and that means from a market differentiation standpoint, she probably would buy that device over another one. Secondly, and I'm going to wrap up on here, this idea is that responsible AI is really about trust. And there's a lot of conversations right now, which it's great that these are happening. What does trust mean in AI? A first key seminal aspect of trust that we feel, and is also, I just think, true, is people need to feel listened to. It's one thing to say, hey, trust us, when the people building tools know that they do not want in any way to cause harm. However, what we always have to keep in mind as the people who are blessed with creating these amazing technologies is this is a brand new world, even for the people creating it. The whole field is nascent of, quote, AI or responsible ethics or innovation, or it's newer, 5 to 10 years old. So a lot of times people aren't saying, I don't trust you because I think the organization is doing something wrong. They're just saying, you got to kind of explain the whole paradigm to me, and let's have a conversation versus just talking at me assuming that I may know what I don't know. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, maybe when we get to the panel at the end, because I do want to honor time, and my time is wrapped up. But as I said, this is some of the work I mentioned that IEEE Standards Association is doing. And please feel free to reach me on my my work email here, and I'd be thrilled to get you hooked up with any of the work that we're doing in IEEE SA. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my deck. And now, sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. We had a question. I think Alpesh answered it. So the question, okay, is now in the answer tab. The question was, will new impact standards come or all over, or all is covered by these 14 standards P7000 series? So Alpesh mentioned there will continue to be additional impact standards over time. I'm not sure if you want to add anything. For example, work socio-technical standards around age-appropriate design are in development in the P2089 standardization program, exploring children's data governance. Do you want to add anything?
Just to thank you, Alpesh, for adding that information in there. And yes, basically just to agree with what he said, what's really exciting is there's obviously going to be continued need to both develop new standards, which is something we're always excited about discussing, or to get more people involved in any of the standards, the impact or technical standards I mentioned, where again, they can get in touch with Alpesh or I, and we'll connect them to the group that we feel, or that they feel they most want to get involved with. So anyway, thanks, Larissa and Alpesh.
Okay, great. So, Andre, if you want, meanwhile, you can share your screen. If you don't know Andre, he's the founder of IEEE Earth Lab. He's also, he did doctoral researcher in Harvard, and he's the executive member at the Council of Extended Intelligence. So he will be talking about the case for extended intelligence and empowering communities in the age of automation. So, Andre, let us know if you have any problem while sharing your screen. His talk will discuss, yeah. All is good?
Yes, I will share it in a bit. Maybe I start just by having a short introduction to my talk.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be part of this panel with so many amazing activists and scholars who are working to advance AI for the public good. And it's really fascinating, right, to see how quickly within the last 5 years or so, we have seen a shift from, you know, the techno-utopianism that has shaped the tech innovation culture coming out of Silicon Valley for many decades towards questions of responsibility that are now shaping up this emergent discourse on tech ethics. So it is really exciting to be part of this. And I'd like to begin my part of this session really by recognizing that the tech industry is at a historic turning point. That means, you know, especially in the field of AI, even though we're seeing many breakthroughs in AI research that are rapidly expanding development of so-called smart technologies and infrastructures, the promises of the so-called fourth industrial revolution are often overshadowed by systemic breakdowns, including the perils of accelerating climate change. So I'm here today to talk about the question of AI ethics, in particular with regard to our environmental crises. And isn't it really breathtaking to see how quickly we see these crises unfolding around the world, the number of wildfires, droughts, floodings, storms, and so on and so forth that have just happened within the last 12 months or so, really reminds us that, you know, sustained investments in technological progress alone may not always solve, but it can also exacerbate historic root causes of complex systemic issues. And also for that reason, it is so important to have a conversation like this and to really understand what are the ethical principles and the kinds of responsibilities that we need to embed in our innovations. So I'm going to share my screen now. And please let me know if you can see it. It's a black screen for now, but what I want to contribute to today's talk is really to open up the field of ethics also towards an emergent form of inquiry that we could call system awareness. The Anthropocene, climate change, these are all very systemic issues. And so sometimes it is also important to go back in history and see how different streams of research, especially in the field of computer science, have evolved around certain principles. And sometimes I think it is very important to also recognize that artificial intelligence is just one out of different interpretations as research programs, how we can utilize computational technologies. And I propose that it is also important to reconsider the field of cybernetics to understand better what kind of systemic interventions we can develop to mitigate some of the climate crisis issues that I just mentioned earlier. So as we see sort of the Anthropocene as a systemic issue, and I like always to show this so-called map of the internet by the Opti project, but somehow when we talk about systems, the term AI doesn't really fit into it because it is really just about isolating computation technologies and focusing on computer intelligence alone. And at the same time, IA, intelligence augmentation, does also not really hit the point because there we also just see sort of the utilization of smart technologies to augment sort of one stakeholder within the system. And so what John and I and many others within the IEEE Standards Association and a growing academic network out of the MIT and Harvard ecosystems have developed is a new term that we call extended intelligence, which proposes that it is not artificial intelligence in isolation, but rather the economic and political and socioeconomic and cultural systems that these technologies are embedded in and integrated into that need to be addressed and possibly redesigned in order to avoid reductionist outcomes with these technologies. And so when we look sort of at the evolution of system theory, we also see that there's a growing awareness around that it is really difficult to control a system because we are integral participants within them. And for that reason, our behavior also actively changes and determines the dynamics of the system as a whole. So John has already addressed it as part of his talk, but what I'm proposing also here is sort of how do we make sense of ethical AI? It is really about rethinking design thinking and design practice as an act of participation, as a form of allowing different stakeholders to participate in the making, but then also to see the design itself as a participation in complex systems. So all of our design decisions also need to recognize the impacts these products and services and infrastructures have across scales of the system, from the micro to the macro, so to say. And in many ways, the UN Sustainable Development Goals have developed a very comprehensive and holistic guide for complex system interventions. And there are many solutions that are emerging out of this framework that really show how we can actually use a collaborative approach to design, to intervene into some of the complex systemic issues that we are facing. And what is also growing as an awareness is that AI innovation in particular can actually accelerate the implementation of sustainable development goals as long as a new systemic approach to AI governance is developed that is supporting socially, environmentally, and economically inclusive growth. So, the Great Reset of the post-COVID-19 recovery that the World Economic Forum and many other organizations are currently talking about in terms of how can we actually redesign our institutions in ways that are more supportive to sustainable development. We also see an increased demand for open innovation ecosystems that integrate the technology development around artificial intelligence and sustainability research and practices in a new kind of public-private people partnership. And therefore, the challenge of sustainable AI innovation also involves the mainstreaming of ethical research methodologies that, for example, John has already presented in the previous talk. And what happens with these methodologies is also that they offer a new social contract between tech developers and end users to enable co-creative processes of sensing and prototyping and validating and refining complex solutions in culturally grounded real-life settings. And the effect of this is that they redistribute decision-making powers among stakeholders, and they also foster new forms of futures literacy amongst people that have, never been involved in the development or design of technologies. And these forms of futures literacy actually challenge tech industries to adapt to different kinds of desired outcomes that often prioritize the well-being of people and the planet over productivity and growth. So in that regard, what I am working on is to understand how values-based community traditions remain an integral aspect of life for the majority of humanity today. So how can cultural and spiritual traditions actually offer a different kind of guide to the development of technologies that integrate these kinds of different innovation processes in the wisdom that societies have developed for millennia around sustaining humane relationships between one another and the environment across generations. In one particular case study that I would like to offer today is coming out of Bali, Indonesia, where we are participating in the making of an emergent innovation campus that is looking at integrating traditional Balinese values into ICT development practices. And what you're seeing here is the logo of a philosophy that has emerged in Bali centuries ago. It is called Trihita Karana, and it is the so-called philosophy of happiness. And the Trihita Karana system describes happiness as the interrelationship between three different forms of harmony. That is harmony between self and people, between self and nature, and between self and spirit. And as you can also see, they are kind of interlinked into a holistic feedback loop, so to say. So the idea is that only if we address all the three different layers of this harmony in relationship to each other, then can we also foster happiness in our societies. What I have been working on is to think about how the Trihita Karana model can be converted into a guide or a compass, so to say, to guide our innovation practices. And as we see here again, we see the Trihita Karana symbol as the interrelationship between people, nature, and spirit. And at the same time, they can also be seen as the interrelationships or interspaces of three spheres. That is the ethnosphere, the technosphere, and the biosphere. And the ethnosphere, in this case, is sort of, so to say, brought alive by the interrelationship between people and spirit. It is sort of the sum total of the values and beliefs that cultural legacies have developed for the longest time. Then you see the technosphere is sort of mitigating also the relationship between people and nature. As we can also see that technological advances are ultimately altering our environment in ways that are often part of unanticipated outcomes. And finally, the biosphere is nature brought alive through spirit, you can say. And you can also see sort of in that case that these three harmonies and these three spheres, they form an integrated system, and the distributed strength determines the balance of the system as a whole. And the Anthropocene that I mentioned earlier is basically the symptom of an overgrowth of the technosphere, and it has weakened the Trihita Karana system that has been fostered in Balinese culture for a long time. So the challenge that we are facing is basically, how can we actually reintegrate the technosphere, our technological innovations, back into nature and human culture? And so this Tritakarana compass is proposing iterative cycles of sense-making between different fields of knowledge and inquiry. And so, for example, the relationship and harmony with spirit is the balancing act between artistic perspectives and scientific perspectives. Or a harmony with nature is the balancing act between economic interests and spiritual guidance. And finally, the relationship and harmony between people is the balancing act between global perspectives and local perspectives. So what I'm hoping what we can do with this compass is to really understand how cultural knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge systems, can be repurposed for new ethical frameworks that can guide our decision-making processes in new public-private people partnerships, in new open innovation ecosystems. And so something like the Tritakarana compass provides coordinates for navigating the paradigm shifts of our early 21st century. And it is allowing us to sense and prototype and validate complex systems interventions with the wisdom and knowledge that has been developed by human cultures for a long time. And so recently, I launched a new industry connections group, the IEEE Earth Lab, that is really looking into different ways how we can co-create new solutions to climate resilience with artificial intelligence, but guided by community wisdom in different cultures. So we are planning to develop and support a global network of so-called living labs that advance ecologically aligned designs with AI for efficient livable cities and low carbon, resilient and secure infrastructures and thriving ecosystems for and with communities most impacted by the effects of global warming. We already have pilots not only in Bali, but also starting now with communities in the Sahel region in Africa and in the Pacific region. And we are looking for more participants who are interested in exploring this interesting intersection between community guardianship and artificial intelligence innovation for advancing climate resilience. So this is the end of my talk. I look forward to questions and to a conversation with the whole panel. Thank you.
So thank you, Andre. Let's check if we have any question. Guys, yes, feel free to react and clap for Andre and John. Thank you so much for both of you for the presentations. If anyone have any question, please ask in the question tab. We can now ask Andre and John, or also Karen and Michaela. So Andre, how do you see the ideas John shared applying via the lab?
They are an integral part of it, of course. I think the global initiative that John has been leading for recent years has also, advanced understanding that ethics is not a universal term. It is informed by very different kinds of epistemologies that are contextualized within sociocultural systems. And so I think the Earth Lab is really kind of an extension to the understanding that we need to develop different kinds of ethics frameworks, so to say a multi-stakeholder ethics frameworks that allows for a fair and balanced interplay between different cultural values and virtues and wisdom. And so what we are doing at the Earth Lab, or what we are going to do, the initiative has just launched, is basically look at ways how communities can take these ethical principles and actually also participate actively in the making and governance of these technologies on the ground for the advancement of sustainable development projects. So I absolutely think that we are standing on the shoulder of giants, so to say, with the president of John's Global Initiative, and we are hoping to offer some practical outcomes that can serve as case studies how these principles can actually move into practice.
And if it's okay, Larissa, maybe there's other questions, but Andre, first of all, thank you very much. You're incredibly gracious. I just want to point out that the ethically aligned design and the work of the initiative, I'm honored to help be a part of it. The volunteers that drive it, and Andre, I know you know this, I'm just telling for the audience, they're really what created it. And as I mentioned earlier, and this is the work that Andre has helped me with, just his background even before the work he's now doing with the new lab he's driving. I think I mentioned this, the feedback that we got, which I found so exciting, was a lot of people saying, hey, the first version of ethically aligned design back in 2016 feels kind of Western. I'll be honest, I didn't know exactly what that meant, meaning I'm not an idiot, but I wasn't entirely sure what that meant from a applied ethics sensibility. So the second version of ethically aligned design, and also the final version, has an entire chapter called Classical Ethics in Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. I cannot recommend highly enough that you read that chapter, because I think we only had 2 Westerners in the group. Everyone else, there was someone from Thailand, I think someone from Japan. And what was so useful to me as someone, I live in America, was not a question of us versus them or either versus or, but very much a yes and. As Andre explained so beautifully, epistemologies that kind of open one's mind to knowing how, especially for me, to think about the environment and nature. I tend to think of nature, at least growing up, like I'm looking out a window right now and I see a beautiful birch tree. Like, oh, I want that birch tree to stay here because it looks pretty. That's awesome. But, and I understand the idea of the resources of water and stuff that is also needed to drive whatever. But the more non-Western traditions or indigenous traditions that I read, where honoring the environment is sort of the same way that I would view honoring my kids or a brother, is so deeply useful and helpful, but also just as important. It's not just about educating John. It's about understanding that designing in a participatory way with those stakeholders that have those different epistemologies is a design imperative, right? Outside of what I feel, what other people feel. Honoring end user values is also just the design that has to happen, or literally it is not inclusive design. So anyway, I just wanted to add on to Andre's beautiful presentation and also point out he's very gracious, but 700 or more, now we have about 5,000 people in the larger community, drive all this. And I love, especially, I love the Westerners too, I am one, but I learned and have learned so much from this partnership with City.AI. I love talking to Reem about Beirut. We have another group we work with in Mexico City. I love learning about Latin America. Same thing with India, etc. So just wanted to point out that's another reason I love the global aspect of what both of these organizations are doing. And we have to be inclusive of these epistemologies.
Yes, and thing to it. Sorry, this is a very important point, John. Right? It is really about understanding how these systemic changes that some of these, IEEE initiatives, actually, like the global initiatives, are advancing, is by creating themselves also a framework for participatory design, which means that every participant is also a leader in contributing their voice and shaping these global frameworks that then can, be shared and adapted by different stakeholders and change makers. So if we are talking, or when we are talking about the different epistemological frameworks, it is also about recognizing that a role for initiatives like the Earth Lab will be to empower the communities to adopt and govern these innovations themselves. So in ways that are really contextualized and grounded in their lived realities. And it is also, allowing the possibility of developing alternative solutions that might not fit into the neat frameworks of innovation alone. Sometimes innovation also means to look back and see how we have actually interacted with the environment for the longest time.
Yes, so thanks, Andre and John, for adding to both presentations. We have 2 more questions. I'm not sure if you can see them. First of all, we have from Kohi, how to implement this concept into real world, such as collaboration with private corporation or government. Maybe Kohi, can you tell us what do you mean, how to implement this concept, which concept? I'm not sure if, Andre, you understood which concept. Otherwise, we can wait and step in to the second question.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have a bit more
yeah, please.
clarification.
So if you want to add it in the question, Kohi, so we can understand your question. We have another question. Do you think it is possible for these concepts, standards, and frameworks to be applied to the development of military technology and policing in cities? It feels like discussions on ethics in AI always keep these spheres outside of the discussion.
Wow, that is a tough question, right?
Yeah.
You know, it is interesting. I don't know if I have a helpful answer to this very, very you know, important question, actually. But it is interesting to see also how the like the concept of ethical AI, right? It can also be adopted in ways that are actually just distracting from much deeper issues that should be addressed. And that is just the case in you know, particular like say adoption cases where there's actually not a real interest in increasing responsibility along these technological systems, but rather recognizing that AI ethics has become such a standard culture now. As I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, how amazing it is to observe how the culture has shifted, right? And nowadays, we see that people are really concerned on a broad scale. The users themselves, that's what I mean. The users are concerned on a broad scale about the ethical implications of the technologies they are using. And you see that trend increasing and accelerating. So what happens is also that maybe there are companies, for example, that are actually feeling it is now important to use this as a label in order to actually continue producing and selling technologies. And so there's a fine line between adopting these principles responsibly or just using them as a label. And you know, I'm not sure how far this then extends also to the question of military technology. But I do think that it is very important also, you know, to have these processes of following up in the implementation of the principles so that they remain effective once they are being utilized and operationalized.
So I hope this answered your question, Chai. So please, if you have any other question or input, feel free to ask it again. So Kohi replied, the concept means ethical AI approach into real business or society. I'm wondering how to implement this study into our process. So the question was how to implement ethical AI approach into real world, such as collaboration with private corporations or government.
Well, maybe this is also a question that John could contribute quite a lot to, because you know, John has already shared sort of the new development around ethical AI for business recently. But I do think, you know, there are new innovation practices emerging. I mentioned it a bit in my talk around this notion of living labs or participatory design, where you actually, you know, change the innovation structure within the organization in ways that people are allowed to offer their perspectives in the process of making these technologies and solutions. And I think this is part of a longer conversation, but I do think that also, you know, the recent project that John has introduced is really actively working on bridging these different fronts between tech ethics and business. So maybe, John, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, thank you, Andre. I think, excuse me, first of all, thanks for the question. I think one thing, I was just talking with a lawyer in the space of AI, and she actually has worked in a lot of very, very senior American policy-based situations. And what she's finding with a lot of her C-level, meaning very senior people in organizations, is a lot of times, like that readiness checklist I pointed out, a strong recommendation that she would make, and I would agree with her, is first of all, just to get all the different stakeholders that are transversal across an organization together in the same room. Now that might sound strange, but the point is that whether it's a CIO, the most senior technical person, the CMO, the marketing person, and then let's call it, whatever the other C title would be, but let's call it operations. How does work actually get done? A lot of times what we've been hearing is that AI provides, or responsible AI provides, a great opportunity for cross-pollination for those different groups to talk to each other, where it's not that they don't talk to each other now, but they don't necessarily talk to each other at the outset of design, where each different department or area is designing. Like, I'll give you an example. 10 years ago when I worked in PR, a lot of crisis management, and why PR often one of the main tools that's so needed, is because you release a product, kind of getting it out fast to market, and of course you've tested it so it doesn't harm in major ways or whatever, but then it goes out to market and something happens, right? So crisis management after the case is always more challenging than identifying issues before something is released. So anyway, step one is, what's the first thing to do is get all the stakeholders that you can in a room together and cross-pollinate. And that's what we did with a lot of our ethically aligned design work. And here also, and I'm going to wrap up because I know we're at the top of the hour, but here also is to recognize that even if you all speak the same language, whether you're in American speaking English or in, Mexico City speaking Spanish, if you have an engineer, an applied ethicist or a philosopher, someone who is a human rights lawyer, and then say a project manager, in one real, very real sense, they all speak different languages, even if they all speak Spanish. Meaning the taxonomy of the framing of what they say is based on their expertise, which of course it should be. So all it is to say, the other part of participatory design as a start is to look at these different tools and simply just ask your colleagues, what do you think about this? How does this work for you or not? When you hear the word ethics, does it terrify you and think we're talking about morality? Or is there a responsible AI-driven series of methodologies that we can adopt and try and test? Also, the second thing, and I'll end up here, is you can test them in isolation, right? Get a whiteboard out and do some scenario planning and say, what would happen if we did, instead of pushing a product to market in the normal way, quickly and all that. We took an extra couple months up front and really did this responsible AI design thing and start to do a evaluation on a spreadsheet even. The less risk we have less PR crisis costs at the end, let alone less harm for people. The more innovation we have, et cetera. Anyway, longish answer, but the point is that cross-pollination, where you don't have experts on staff, that's where experts like on the call today, certainly at IEEE, we can identify volunteers to come in and work with you, whatever. And then just ask a ton of questions. It helps move away from fear and get to pragmatism. Minutes networking time. What we're going to do now is go to our second set of presentations. So both Michaela and Karen are going to go for about 20 minutes each. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for more questions, but we also definitely didn't want to keep their awesome presentations from starting. So first of all, Michaela, really honored to have Michaela Topolnik, and forgive me, Michaela, if I said your name incorrectly. But she's the deputy. Was that close at least? All right, you're very kind. Michaela's deputy director of the Directorate for Science, Research and Economy, is the chief executive officer for the city of Vienna. Michaela, your full bio is on the Eventbrite, so rather than read it, I'm going to go to you because you'll do your bio much better than me. But really excited for your talk, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for invitation. And it is great to be here. As you said already, I'm working at the City of Vienna, and they're responsible for all kinds of science, research, economy. My background is political science as well as international economics, so it's not a technical background. But as I also were working in technology policy and scientific science policy, I'm kind of really interested in technical developments and technical stuff. The second issue will be on artificial intelligence strategy and digital agenda of the city of Vienna. And then I will bring a best practice project, a certification of AI use case at the Wiener Stadtwerke, which is in cooperation with the IEEE. And it's called the Ethics Certification Program for Autonomous Intelligence Systems. And at that point, I just want to thank two colleagues of mine. So Sandra Heisenberger, she is the Chief Information Security Officer of the City of Vienna, and she's responsible for the AI strategy. And Dietmar Schabl, Stadtwerke, which is an enterprise of the City of Vienna Corporation, and dealing on the responsible for the project and the cooperation with the IEEE SA on the special use case, and I will talk about that at the end. Maybe to bring some things into context, for Vienna, which is, well, in the middle of Europe, and the capital city of Austria, we have almost 2 million inhabitants already. And as we're working of City of Vienna and really focus on the strategic and visionary agenda of the City of Vienna, I want to point out that 30,000 public employees at the Viennese and city administration. An additional 30,000 employees are engaged in public health services and also employees from this of the City of Vienna. And another about 15,000 employees are working at the Wiener Stadtwerke Group, which is providing energy services, IT services, public transport, and also funeral services and much more. And to mention, finally, Vienna was 10 times the most livable city in the world, so both from the Mercer study, but also other studies. And I mentioned this because I will come back on that later on. What is our vision concerning digital humanism and digitalization? So happened. Vienna has set itself the goal of becoming the digitization. So focusing on the technical digitization. But we think that it's for a municipality, it's very important also to advance digitization in order to improve on the one hand and to make people's life easier. But digitalization and digital media are not always equally accessible for all citizens. Algorithms per se, which are used, are not neutral and non-judgmental. The city like Vienna, we therefore think we have to be aware of our responsibility, and we want to show responsibility and sensible handling of digitalization and also of data, because this does not automatically result from a pure technology application. So that was why we are now focusing on the issue of digital. And for that, we started the Manifesto on Digital Humanism. It was proclaimed in 2019 and it by the TU Vienna, and there are about 7 issues were proclaimed. And also the mayor proclaimed humanism to be a city's main focus for 2020. So we started then, not a strategic process, but we said we want to make a initiative for digital humanism. We want to provide here an umbrella and a framework for numerous activities that are already taking place in the city and hopefully will take place in the city. So we developed a vision for digital humanism in a city. As I said already, we want to establish Vienna as the capital of digital humanism, not only as a capital of digitization, and make it also internationally visible. We want also to increase singly placed technology applications under the premise of the democratic values and humanism. So like in the tradition of Austria, Vienna in the last century's turn. And also we want, for the scientific and research field, we want to develop a critical mass of expert institutions who research in Vienna to help a digital society and work on different issues. This all goes in this, that we are defining digital as a concept that describes and influences mostly the combination of technology and humankind. So for a better society, better life, and also very important, fully respecting human rights. So the focus is on the people, on the human being. Technology as a tool and an instrument to make or to help people, but always having people or the human, the individual in the focus. We also focus on the responsible and sensible use of the city with digitization, data security. It's also a question of trust and reliability. So it's about data protection and security, of course, but it's also about making infrastructure available, so in the sense of digital services of general interest. So Daseinsvorsorge, we call it. For this, Vienna is quite famous, but it's not only for infrastructural building, it's also about bringing the analog world into the digital, human rights, consumer protection. So it's also about fundamental rights and freedoms, but also not only. We also, of course, want to use digitization to enable more social participation. So both in the nuances and design. So we have a platform for participatory engagement of people and the citizens. So this is kind of the key messages we want to implement as a city. And as I said, we launched the Framework Initiative for Digital Humanism in February. Unfortunately, it was closely before the lockdown in Austria. But we started a co-creation process to define and develop basic principles for digital activities, so both of city and in the city of Vienna. And we're dealing there with topics like ethics, privacy and security, work and education in the digital age, arts and culture, which also has a long tradition in Austria, and we think it's quite important to connect here technical application, technical science with art and culture and social sciences. Furthermore, we're also planning on events to make the topic and the aspects of digital humanism understandable, to start discussions. We're also in discussions with scientists, politicians for our co-creation process. We already have involved 50 scientists from all different fields, both technical as well as social science as well as law. And but in the next phase, we want to expand and address other groups. And I like this, as Andrew mentioned, the living lab concepts. So we hope that we can also use these living lab concepts to develop with people, with citizens, with different target groups on more issues, and really to enroll the whole framework initiative, to bring it into the to the citizens and into the city. Because at the moment, I think we are still on the base all these criteria principles on basic documents. So the Vienna Manifesto for Digital Humanism I already mentioned. In the digital agenda, we have the Vienna Digital Principles, Guidelines and Leitmotif. And as part of the digital agenda, we also have the Artificial Intelligence Strategy. I have put in the links where you can find all this. These gave the basis and leitmotifs for consideration activities for the stakeholders that are dealing with the dimension of digitization, and also the implementing digitalizations within the framework of these guidelines. So I just want to point out a few of those guidelines or core principles. So in the manifesto, we have the digital technologies should be designed to promote democracy and inclusion. This will require special efforts to overcome inequalities and also to use the emancipatory potential of digital technologies to make our society more inclusive, or privacy and freedom of speech, which is also very important in social media, online platforms. There needs to be better safeguard to free expression of opinion and disseminate of information, and also to protect privacy. More effective regulations and rules are needed to ensure prediction, accuracy, fairness, and equality, accountability, and also transparency of software programs and algorithms the city itself is using, but also that is implemented from other players. Oops. And as well, decision with consequences. Decisions always need to be, finally, have to be a human decision making and cannot be replaced by machines. I think I skipped the, well, of course, the interdisciplinary approach in a scientific community is also quite an important prerequisite. So to bring together social science, technical science, computer science with art, and to break disciplinary silos. And one point also I want to stress is that practitioners ought to understand their responsibility also, and to need to understand that no technology is neutral or sensitive to see. They have to be sensitive to see both potential benefits and possible downsides. Well, we also have the Vienna digital principles, just to mention, like age appropriateness, accessibility, digital equality, gender equality, or trust and security. So these are guidelines we built upon. And we also have the City of Vienna Artificial Intelligence Strategy, as the Vienna administration has drawn up a municipal strategy for its task and responsibilities, also taking into account the major pillars that an administrative perspective has, so efficiency gain, security, and ethics. And also we have again the human-centered AI, which means for us to assure transparency, traceability, and effective protection against distortion, discrimination, and manipulation. It also means, as I said, decision-making authorities cannot be delegated to computer system, but remains their responsibility. And just to mention, we are talking here on about weak AI, but I think don't have to go into detail on that. We have then strategic goals, just to mention. The intention is harness the potential of artificial intelligence in an effort to improve services for citizens, and furthermore also to create new services that take into account the citizen interest, or also application of artificial intelligence improves to user-friendly citizen services, or just to find generic application scenarios and specific case studies to provide terms of reference for meaningful and expedient implementation of artificial intelligence. I think we also have identified challenges in using AI. Just data handling, of course, means as a city we also have to face like that greater data availability in terms of quantity, quality, data types, and access has to be linked up. Our data quality, of course, for training data is also an important issue, like high quality of training data has to be guaranteed. As a city, we really have lots of different data and different qualities. But if you make prediction for future events, of course, outdated data should not be used. Or to be clear that that there can be a bias in initial data. So the performance of contemporary AI system hinges on the quality and quantity of the data, and it must be assured that the data source is trustworthy, credible. This should be the responsibility also, of course, of a city. we just looked at our AI use cases, and we had a model of generic use cases, like to identify like what to do for inputs, like emails, official forms, applications, social media, and where we put in, or we implemented AI methods and algorithm for better output than to use it for intelligent testing, texting, summaries, knowledge management, and decision-making support. And we then made a selection and assessment of AI use cases out of about 70 different AI use cases that were collected. There were a few cases then selected to make then feasibility studies. But in addition to that, it is the plan, and it's also stated in the strategy, that with these plans that city services should be screened, all should be screened for the and should be checked whether algorithm or AI is used, and all these AI use cases should be then undergo for a feasibility study, and also the ethical criteria check. So this will be a huge project. We haven't started that. We just, as I said, started with a few examples. One example is the Wien-bot, the Vienna bot, which is City of Vienna voice assistant. It's both in German and in English. Technology in the field of natural languages, and it's already broadly used, as the figures show. We have it implemented in 2016. This is one of the best practice projects, and I now want to, as I already mentioned at the beginning, to focus or to highlight the certificate of AI use cases at the Wiener Stadtwerke, which is in cooperation with IEEE SA. It's the ethics certificate program for autonomous and intelligent system. And I think it's the partnership is, I think, kind of unique, or I think in the first step, because the Stadtwerke also identified use cases and now try with the ethics certification program to select or to challenge their use cases, which is an internal use case of AI for the I think they selected the accountability. There were 3 criteria: transparency, accountability, algorithm bias, and privacy. That is also developed by the IEEE. As the goal is to create specification for certification and marketing processes to advance as these 3 criteria: transparency, accountability, and it should help, or should emphasize the need also to communicate to consumers and these citizens whether these algorithms are safe or trusted. And as a globally recognized body of experts, they can provide a public available and transparent series of marks. And I think this is the first use case where this specific criteria set is used, and the cooperation, I think IEEE SA launched the space in October 2000. SA and Wiener Stadtwerke concerning the proof of concept was applied on this one use case. Currently, it's changing on a regular basis on this proof of concept. So at the moment, I think there's the selection of 1 out of the 3 sets of criteria. It's already done, the accountability criteria. And now there's a list of detailed criteria, and the Wiener Stadtwerke now has to prove that the use case is ethical, uncritical, and has to give proof of concept at this internal use case. And I think this is we will also try other AI implementations to develop like ethical criteria. And I think this specific project really is also for a good example for digital humanism, because again we say digitization should improve the lives of everyone in Vienna, which this is our vision, and we want to identify challenges in good times and develop solutions to make people's life better. So not digitization only, but digital humanism, and to make the people more confident and saying data are used in a good and responsible way. And so digital humanism is a commitment of the City of Vienna to strike a balance between technology progress and civilizational development. So Vienna is focusing again on people, both in analogous to digital. And the city strives to be not only in the real, but also in the digital world. As I said in the beginning, the most livable city in the world. And we want to react responsible, human, fair, transparent, and also, of course, data protection, privacy as one of the main concepts to be in a good use of data and security. I think I will, digital humanism we see as a human protection as well. And our plan is now that we will continue the framework initiative, bring it on the next level. We are just finishing the process with the working groups. And then in the next phase, we want to outreach to other groups and also to roll out new projects. One of course, will also be the participatory approach for different kinds of issues. We're still planning on that. Okay, I hope this was my talk. I hope it was not too long. It took a little bit longer. So.
Wonderful.
Okay.
What I want to do is, Kristen, Raphael asked a fantastic question. If it's okay with you, both Michaela and Kristen, I want to make sure we get to Karen's presentation, and then we'll take all questions at the end, just so we can make sure. But again, Dankeschön. And also, real honor to be working with you and the City of Vienna on that project, this IEEE Standards Association. Thank you very much. Okay. Sure, great. All right, so over now to the amazing Karen Bhatia, who I've had the pleasure of meeting a number of times, who's driving so much amazing work in New York City, especially challenging in the current times, like for any city administrator. Just over the first part of Karen's bio, Karen, while you're preparing your talk and all that, your deck. Karen is Senior Vice President at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, leading creative and applied tech strategies to promote economic development and entrepreneurship throughout the city. And I know you have deep expertise in all things applied ethics and with regards to city and organizations. Anyway, Karen, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon to everyone, or good evening for those who might be over in Europe or in other places as well. Thank you to the IEEE and City.AI for inviting me to participate. I will now share my screen and my deck. I'm hoping you will all be able to see this. If not, please let me know. So I want to start off by just telling you briefly about the work that we're doing here in New York City. As John had mentioned, I'm in the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and I lead our work around applied technologies and our strategy, specifically about ways in which we could promote different technologies and different industries in New York City to see business development, entrepreneurship, as well as ultimately good jobs resulting from those areas. Some of the areas that I've led is a virtual reality and augmented reality lab, our AI strategy for the City of New York, as well as our blockchain strategy, among other applied technologies. And I wanted to, in this presentation, go over the work that we've done in coming up with our strategy for AI and ethics in New York City, as well as going over the current status of this project, as well as next steps. In the New York City Economic Development Corporation, we're considered the city's economic engine. And the ways in which we've tried to promote economic development is oftentimes through piloting programs for entrepreneurs, through accelerators and incubators, through workforce development programs, as well as through networking and providing spaces for entrepreneurs and industry to be able to work together. We saw an incredible opportunity for artificial intelligence in New York. Industries across the board that New York City is known for has been adopting artificial intelligence for years, especially with the onset of tremendous amounts of data that they're sitting on. We've seen funding in New York City grow in terms of VC funding, and New York City over the course of 5 years up until 2013 to 2018 had 5-year growth in funding that was significantly higher compared to the Bay Area, other New York City, other cities in the United States, as well as the nation and even globally. And New York City is comparable to a number of different countries when it comes to VC investment. We've also seen a tremendous opportunity in the number of startups that New York City was holding onto, both in terms of starting and scaling around AI and data. And New York City is second to the Bay Area in terms of the number of startups in these fields. We also looked into jobs, which is essentially what the New York City Economic Development Corporation looks into, good jobs for New Yorkers. And across the board, New York City had the highest concentration of AI and machine learning jobs in the United States. And we saw an opportunity here to think about ways in which we could capitalize on this momentum and this opportunity around AI and machine learning, to think about how can companies integrate this some more, and what are ways in which we could help support entrepreneurship in this sector. As I mentioned, AI is growing in New York City. According to a report that was done by Cognizant, a number of industries are going to be adopting artificial intelligence and are continuing to do so at this moment. And so we have a number of them that are home to New York: financial services, insurance, healthcare, manufacturing, technology, and retail across the board. And 70% of companies that were surveyed indicated that by 2040, they'll be integrating AI into some part of their businesses. If we look into the industries that New York City is home to, these areas very much correspond to the areas in which AI is being integrated. A number of these industries, including financial services, as mentioned before, business services, professional services, healthcare, government, transportation. A number of these areas very much coincide with opportunity growth areas for artificial intelligence, industry adoption, as well as job growth in these fields. These are some of the sectors in which New York City has startups and a thriving startup ecosystem around mobility, healthcare, finance, media, the creative sectors, clean tech, as well as energy. Some of the unicorns that we have that are headquartered in New York City are in a variety of different functionalities, including software, hardware, robotics, business support, as well as storage. You can see some of the top 5 unicorns that we have here that are based in New York. And so given all of this, we thought to ourselves, what are we going to do as a city to ensure that integration of this technology in these industries benefits all and is also accessible to all in terms of workforce opportunities? We have a number of premier institutions in New York that are home to a lot of thought leadership and applications around artificial intelligence and data science. We have Columbia University and a variety of their programs, NYU programs such as AI Now, GovLab, their engineering schools, the New York Academy of Sciences, Cornell Tech, CUNY. We also have a number of institutions like IBM Watson, as well as a number of other larger industries that are experimenting with and also integrating and commercializing artificial intelligence. However, despite all of these opportunities across the board and over the course of the past several years, we've been hearing about growing concerns about AI ethics. This is one tweet in regards to Apple Card that we all are probably familiar with over the past year, in which where Apple Card was released, there was disparate credit ratings for men and for women. We've also seen a number of concerns around issues of bias when it comes to people of different demographics, particularly people of color. Amazon and their facial recognition software has come to question, in which 28 members of Congress were misidentified as people who had arrest records. We've heard across the board that facial recognition has a lot more difficulty identifying people of color, particularly Black women. And there are a number of instances, whether it comes to bias, explainability, transparency, accountability. There are a lot of concerns around AI ethics applications, as well as the decisions that are being made, and ultimately disparate impacts on a variety of our communities. As a result of all of this, we wanted to, in the city of New York, try to seize upon the benefits. We decided our strategy was going to focus on building a New York City Center for Responsible AI that would consist of 4 primary activities. The first is an applied research lab, which would go into best practices and regulation around ethics, building a data collaboratives platform in which we would be doing research and development around data access and data sharing. The third prong focuses on innovation and building an AI for good program. And the fourth prong focuses on workforce and higher education training, specifically around ethics integration for data scientists as well as computer scientists. And I'll go into each of these in a little bit more depth here. So the first one, in terms of the applied research lab, it was essentially what we're considering to be a sandbox. Both Andre as well as John had mentioned specific applications, commercialization, and participation across the board, democratizing this participation from a variety of communities to be able to provide input in the design process, but even from the concept as well. And so some of the pilots that we had thought about would, of course, come from both the commercial applications and as well as government applications of AI uses. And so in instances in which an AI application was being developed, or in retrospect where it was already developed, we envisioned a scenario in which that particular AI application would be analyzed from end to end, meaning from particular concept about who's developing the AI application, what is it being developed for, what is the data that's being inputted, all the way up until the development, the deployment, and the impact, analyzing that entire process from end to end. And the team that would be doing this is a multidisciplinary team where you would have industry experts, technologists, lawyers, you would have regulators, government, in order to make sure that they were informed. And you consistently hear about a tremendous chasm between those who are regulating these technologies and their understanding of these technologies. But a critical component is ensuring that the public and civil society has a seat at the table, especially those who would be impacted by this particular application. And as I mentioned, this team, depending on that particular pilot, would be cobbled together and put together to analyze and think critically about this application and look into both outputs in regards to creating a number of ethical tools and services and best practices that could be shared. And so this is a way in which we could think about actual commercial applications and moving from more of the abstract ideas around ethics, but seeing about specifically about how does bias, how does explainability with particular AI applications come to be implemented and integrated into a particular AI application? And how do we learn from that application, thinking about what are some best practices within that industry, within that particular pilot? How can others learn from that? And what are tools by which in the future others can also be able to more easily ensure that that particular ethical principle is being integrated into an application as it's being developed, or to test it after it's being developed? So this was the primary focus of this applied research lab, is to work in collaboration with the private sector as well as with government applications, and to work very closely with prospective regulators to ensure that any particular regulations that come out in regards to data and in regards to artificial intelligence is actually thoughtful, and in addition to that is relevant, both to protecting the public, benefiting the public on one hand, but simultaneously ensuring that there's innovation that's being facilitated. The second prong, as I had mentioned, is a focus on research and development around data collaboratives. What we were envisioning is trying to address the problem of instances in which startups and others have lack of access to data in order to be able to innovate. So in certain sectors, like in the financial sectors, as well as in the healthcare sectors as well, access to data is a commodity. It's like essentially like the way funding used to be a tremendous commodity and still is. Data has grown in that kind of significance. We wanted to facilitate ways in which we could focus on technical structures as well as governance structures to help facilitate data access and do research around opportunities like data trusts. How do we help create models for data sharing agreements and other types of legal templates, focus on other types of technologies, including blockchain, secure multi-party computation, federated learning, among others, so that people are able to derive the values and the innovations that can be born from data access, but simultaneously be able to prevent any kind of negative effects, whether it's privacy, security issues, etc. How do we derive the benefits while mitigating harms associated with any kind of data? The third prong was looking into workforce and specifically around integrating ethics into higher education programs as well as for current employees who are developing the AI applications, as well as the data scientists who are working on these issues. So, we wanted to ensure that ethics is central to their considerations as they're developing these applications. And after they develop the applications, making sure that they have access to the tools that they need in order to test their applications to ensure that there is explainability, accountability. They're looking into disparate harms as well as biases that could be affecting particular populations as well. And the fourth prong is to encourage innovation. And we were going to be setting up an AI for Good program focused on innovations around healthcare, inclusive finance, urban tech, climate change, a number of areas in which we need technology, and technology could particularly be a tremendous asset when we're thinking about solutions to a lot of the larger problems that we're facing. This AI for Good program would specifically focus on access to some of the data sets that are hard to come by, focusing on a digital platform so that these companies are able to share best resources and best practices, have a job platform for areas in which they can have hiring, and also help facilitate customer and pilot matchmaking programs so that they're able to test out their products. They're also able simultaneously to get customers as well. So now what we've seen, I wanted to put this in the context of where we are right now. That was our strategy. We had put out a procurement for it, and we were pretty much on the tail end of picking our partners. It was a public procurement or request for proposals. We were in the cusp of setting up who we were going to be working with. And then we were faced with COVID-19 and the economic recovery. And as you know, New York City was particularly hit hard earlier on in the process. And this has been, devastating globally. We see right now a resurgence across the United States. Luckily, so far, is remaining somewhat stable as we're seeing a tremendous surge across a number of other states as well as cities. In light of all of this, we see an even greater need for responsible artificial intelligence. We see opportunities here for the technology to be used in contact tracing, predictive analytics, vaccine and therapeutic development, determinations about benefits and services. There are concerns around surveillance, and we know that some of these technologies have been used for surveillance purposes, particularly in light of COVID-19. So the current context really underscores the need for this New York City Center for Responsible AI. However, as many municipalities and many other governments know, we're faced with some challenges. So I wanted to go into the New York City current status right now. Now, before I get into some of the numbers in light of COVID-19, New York City, over the course of the past decade, has risen to the #2 tech ecosystem in the world in terms of funding, employment opportunities, talent that we have here, the number of startups, innovative ecosystem that we have, academic institutions, pretty much the entire range of what's needed for a vibrant tech ecosystem. In light of all of that, we're thinking about how do we forward opportunities around these technologies for New Yorkers? How do we forward this New York City Center for Responsible AI? The city is currently facing a deficit of $9 billion. We've seen small business closures across the country, and in New York City, about 21% of small businesses have closed. We're also seeing a tremendous need for equity. COVID-19, as well as a lot of the racial justice issues in the United States, and particularly in New York, have very much underscored the need for a focus on equity when it comes to economic development, as well as other socioeconomic issues as well. What we've seen in terms of small business closures, Black-owned businesses between approximately the same time frame, about 41% of them have closed in New York City compared to about 21% of small business closures at large. Now, in New York City, small businesses are incredibly important. They employ to 50% of our workforce, our private workforce, and they're responsible for about 64% of new jobs. So this could be potentially devastating. In terms of unemployment, from February until now, the unemployment rate in New York City has grown from about 3.4% to approximately 16%. In New York City's communities of color, particularly Asian, Black, and Hispanic workers, face disproportionate amounts of unemployment. It's been approximately 25% of that population compared to about 11% of white workers. Again, this has underscored very much the need for New York to focus on equity issues. And this is, an issue that's facing the United States, that the entire United States is faced with. But in New York City, we're particularly cognizant about our role as the Economic Development Corporation and ensuring that all of our businesses and all of our people are able to benefit from access to opportunity and are not harmed by not only the technology, but they have opportunities in workforce development as well. One of the questions that we're asking, what else is needed in terms of our tech strategy? We have the New York City Center for Responsible AI, and we need to figure out how do we move forward in light of the current context. But also, what else has COVID-19 as well as the economic recovery shown us? And that is a focus on workforce, particularly tech education and training programs. AI and other technologies pose a tremendous opportunity, as I started off in the beginning of this presentation. And just a couple of weeks ago, the World Economic Forum had focused on the future of jobs in light of COVID-19 and underscored the need to prepare for changing jobs and the future of work. They indicated that over the course of the next 5 years, there are going to be 85 million jobs that will be displaced, but 97 million roles that will be created. 1 in 2 workers will need reskilling, and of those remaining, approximately 40% of them will have to upskill. Now, a number of jobs that are included in this rising opportunity include DevOps engineers, AI specialists, marketing managers, talent acquisition specialists, customer service specialists. And what we're doing in New York is trying to figure out what are ways in which we could help continue supporting tech integration in New York City. It's happening anyway across our industries, but how do we make a concerted effort to work closely with the private sector to make sure that in the industries, especially those that have been hardest hit, in our communities that have particularly been hardest hit, how do we make sure that we're preparing them for the jobs of the future? We've seen that, especially in industries that have been service sector industries, in retail, in food services, in tourism, there are ways in which people have to start thinking about changing their business models, digitizing their businesses, and ensuring that tech is integrated across the board. And we're going to need workers to be able to do all of this. So where do we go from here? The area that we see a tremendous opportunity for, both in our original concept of the New York City Center for Responsible AI, as well as this need for workforce preparation around tech integration, especially in areas around software development, AI specialists, is to make sure that we're not only having more public-private partnerships, as Andre had spoken about earlier, but new types of public-private partnerships. Everything that we've gone through over the course of the past 8 months have shown a particular light on the ways in which we need to do things differently. We need alternative sources of funding, especially given the tremendous deficit that New York City is facing right now. We need to work very closely with the private sector, ensuring that there's a commitment for internships and for apprenticeships. And we need entirely new types of models, thinking about ways in which the private sector is going to be hiring for skills and non-traditional credentials. And we're preparing for the holistic needs of workers. One of the other types of demographics that we've seen particularly hard hit by COVID-19 and the current economic recovery are women. They're being displaced far more so than their male counterparts in the workforce, and this begs the need for new types of concepts around childcare, stipends during particular workforce training as well. And we need to work closely with government, academia, the private sector, as well as think tanks to come up with solutions, not only theoretical ones, but ones in which we're able to pilot, fund, and implement at scale. We need a commitment across the board in order to do this. And the last thing that I want to leave you all with is our responsibility individually and collectively to ensure that as we're thinking about this economic recovery and as we're in the midst of trying to figure out vaccinations as well as therapeutic developments for COVID-19, it begs the need for innovations, access to data, collaboration, and each of us, whether it's startups, whether it's those in think tanks, whether it's academics, whether it's in large corporations, whether you're in government, we need to figure out ways in which we could come together and address these systemic issues collectively, and now is the time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate that. And thank you for all the work that you and your colleagues are doing in New York City, especially during such a trying time. Living in the nearby area in Maplewood, New Jersey, I really deeply appreciate all that you're doing just in such a, again, challenging time. So all the specific work you're doing, really, really proud to be a New Yorker. Even though technically I'm in Jersey, I still call myself a New Yorker. The good news is we've had amazing conversations from, I don't want to talk about my own, but everyone else was fantastic. But we are getting closer to the end of the hour. So one thing I'll say is we had some great questions in the chat. Maybe let's do this just so we can honor all the speakers. Is how about as a closer, instead of answering the questions directly here, maybe what we can do, if it works for you, Larissa, is we can cut and paste those questions and then we'll send them to all of the speakers. And then as a follow-up, we'll post the answers to those questions from any of our speakers. It can be more than one for each question as a follow-up to this whole presentation in terms of where we'll also provide all the links from the speakers. So if that works for everyone, even though we aren't getting to your questions, we'll do that. And then how about just in 30 seconds for each of our speakers, and we're going to hold you to it just so we can give Larissa and City.AI a closer at the end. In 30 seconds, just name one thing about anything you've heard today that really stuck out to you as an insight that you're going to take back to your work. And there's no right answer, just something that stuck out to you. So Michaela, maybe we'll start with you. 30 seconds. What's one thing you learned from the presentation?
Well, I think the initial how cities like how New York is dealing with that. Do you hear me? Okay. How is dealing with that I take with me, and I will go into consideration to establish something similar maybe in Vienna.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Danke schön, Michaela, for all your
Thank
wisdom.
you very much for the great ideas and good inputs. I really take a lot out of it.
Thank you so much. All right, Andre, how about you? 30 seconds or so. What's your one of your key takeaways and insights from the program today?
Well, it's very encouraging to hear how cities, local governments are really trying to tackle the challenge of responsible AI integration and innovation. I've seen a lot of, shared interest and overlaps around the principles of living labs, of co-creation, participatory design. So I think what we can do moving forward is also creating those networks of collaboration, of mutual exchange and best practices to strengthen our experience and expertise on these topics. And I'm excited to be part of this growing movement. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andre. And for Karen, Michaela, and Andre, don't forget, please, to put any URLs for people in the chat so that people can find your work specifically. Karen, 30 seconds, a top insight for you from today's presentations.
It really resonated across the board. Everybody seemed to be speaking about the need for ethics, the need for the public to be participating in the design and thinking about the concept around these different technologies, but also very much the need for issues of equity to be integrated. So diversifying the workforce, ensuring that we're being very critical about what's being developed and how it's being developed across the board from end to end. And so I'm looking forward to collaborating with all of those, not only who spoke today, but those who are participating in this. And I think that's going to be critical in order for all of us to move forward and share best practices successfully.
Thanks, Karen. Then for me, I'll use my 30 seconds to say a huge whopping thank you to all the speakers. Round of applause wherever you are. Give it up for the speakers. And to all the great questions and comments, even if we didn't get a chance to get to you. And Larissa, to you and the team at City.AI. Thank you from IEEE Standards Association for the honor of doing this event, for all the work you and the team have put into it. Larissa, back over to you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone, and we will make sure to send you the YouTube link. We recorded everything on YouTube. You can share it with your friend, with your colleague. And as mentioned, we will have another series of talks, so make sure you stay updated on our social media platforms. We will have of course, 2 upcoming, and we will make sure to tackle most of the cities in the world. So stay tuned. And if you would like to be a speaker, please reach out. If you think you can talk about your city, please reach out. And I'll make sure to answer all your questions. Also, IEEE will write a blog and will have an interview with each city. So with Michaela and Karen. So stay updated. We have a lot of exciting stuff soon. So goodbye, everyone. And thank you so much, speakers. This was awesome.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.